no setting sun. You may be seated.
That's good. Thank you to all of you who've been serving well today. A lot of people do a lot of things that some may not notice, but I'm grateful for you. Our shepherds have encouraged us to be looking for men who would fill the role of deacon because we're adding to our group, and I'm grateful for this time. They asked us to submit some names. You have the recommendation list in your hand, and Steve will tell you more about that, but I hope you will seriously consider doing that to help us. The shepherds asked me to preach on this, so we're putting to rest for a moment the prayer series. We'll get back to that. So I'm preaching on deacons today. Bryce will be talking next Sunday, and then we'll get back to prayer in May. I'm going to read from 1 Timothy 3 if you want to follow along with me, or you can just listen to me read as we talk about this important role in the church. Paul begins the chapter by speaking of elders or shepherds, and he turns his attention now to deacons. And before we even get to reading this, you should know that the Greek word here, we call it deacon in a kind of a formal way, but it's really just servant. So in some ways, it's just rendered servant, and it's simply talking about servants. At the same time, these men are to be lifted up in a big way because they are going to be serving in a very important role in a church, and they're examples to follow too. So I hope you will take this seriously when we read this and consider who might fill these roles, these kind of men. Listen to how Paul says this to Timothy, starting in verse 8. In the same way, deacons are to be worthy of respect, sincere, not indulging in much wine, and not pursuing dishonest gain. They must keep hold of the deep truths of the faith, which with a clear conscience. They must first be tested, and then, if there is nothing against them, let them serve as deacons or servants. It's interesting to me in the pastoral epistles, as they've been called, Paul focuses not so much on what men should do, but on what men should be. I think the Lord is concerned about the jobs being done, but he's much more interested in the people who do them. So as you consider what names you might be putting down as recommendations for deacons, please think about the job that man might be doing, but more consider who the man is already. So what should a deacon be like? Well, first, worthy of respect, honorable, dignified, man worth imitating and following. He's the guy you would like to be like in some ways. You would follow where he leads as he serves. Also sincere. The King James says not double-tongued, not a tall tale teller, not deceitful, not a gossip. He's genuine in speech, completely trustworthy. He doesn't act one way here and another way out there. Also not indulging in much wine. As I was a younger man hearing lots of different preachers speak about this, I heard people say, even if you take one drink, you're one drink drunk. I don't know if you've heard that. So don't even take a drink. I've come to see this differently. What Paul is saying here is the deacon, this man, should not pursue the bottle. His reputation must not be one that loves to drink. Since drunkenness is sin, he, of course, is not a drunk, but it's less than that. It's not even preoccupied by alcohol. He doesn't have to have it. If anybody has to have it, it's a red flag and a danger sign. If a man won't give up alcohol, then he's likely he can't give up alcohol. Also, not pursuing dishonest gain. In work and business, there's sometimes some shady gray areas that are questionable for a person in what he does and why he does it. That should not be. It doesn't matter what they're like out there. They should be the same in here and out there. Questionable practices should not take root in Christian arenas. For men who handle money, they should do it well. If they make purchases for the church, represent us in the world, there should be no gray areas. No hint of selfish motives or questionable practices. You may have heard that deacons or servants do the physical, practical stuff so shepherds, elders can do the spiritual stuff. And I know why we say that. I don't even necessarily disagree with it. But you may start thinking deacons do menial jobs. It's not spiritual at all. But listen carefully to what Paul said next. Did you hear it? They must keep hold of the deep truths of the faith with a clear conscience. So these men must have a firm handle on what God has said and the truth of what God is and what he expects, and live lives worthy of that. with conviction, truth telling and truth living all the time. Now, anybody can say what's right, but these guys do what's right with a clear conscience. It's a tall order in this role to be like that, but it's a spiritually minded servant, not just somebody who serves. And you need to know that. The role of a servant leader in the Lord's church is important. A deacon should know the truth, live the faith, because everybody is watching. Notice what Paul says first, that these men should be tested, and if there's nothing held against them, then they should serve. I've never known churches to put deacons through like a testing period, like a probation time. I would be good with that if we did that. But even if we don't do that, the principle should be the same. Watch a man serve and then let him serve in an official role. If he's not already serving, pay attention to that. If you find a good man who's really not doing anything, he's never really served anywhere or anybody, he's never taken the initiative to get off his haunches and actually do something, don't put him in a role of deacon. Find somebody who's already seriously doing something for the Lord and then make them a deacon, because they're already that in some ways. Motivation matters too. The heart of a man will move a man to act, so watch for the heart that he's already serving with already. I like a short story that S.L. Kisher wrote, first appeared in Collier's Weekly, June 5th, 1943, and maybe you've heard it. It's about a tall young Army lieutenant who gets off a train at the Grand Central Station in New York City just a few minutes before 6, the designated meet time. And you read it and you start understanding what's happening in the moment. His heart was pounding because he's about to meet a woman he's never met before. He's gotten to know her through correspondence as he was stationed overseas during the World War. And her letters sustained him, and he couldn't wait to meet her. His name is Lieutenant Blandford. He cherished the letters. He remembers even the one night where her words were extra special. On that night, it's when he was attacked in his plane by a pack of Zeros, and he even saw the grinning face of the enemy pilot. He feared, but she reminded him that even King David, who wrote the 23rd Psalm, feared but trusted in the Lord. And he had imagined her voice, what it might sound like, but he'd never heard it, and he was about to hear it and see her for the very first time. So he watched the sea of people moving through and moving past him, and he studied them to see if he could see it. It was the sign, the symbol, the agreed upon identifier that she would be wearing. It would be a little rose that would be pinned to her lapel. A little red rose would point her out, and he would know that's her. That's her, the 30-year-old Hollis Maynell. The relationship had started because of a simple book in the Army's library at the Florida training camp where he was training. He picked it up, read it, and noticed the notes in the columns, in the margins, and it caught his eye. By the way, you shouldn't write in your books. But others wrote in books, but this one caught his eye. It's almost as if she could peer into his heart as she wrote. And he read it with passion. And since her name was in there, he got a New York City phone book back when they had phone books. And he looked up her address and started to write her. And that's how it started. And it lasted until he was deployed overseas for 13 months. Their relationship grew in letters back and forth. He knew he had grown to love her and believed she would love him too, but she continually refused his request for a picture. He wanted a picture of her, and she said no. Her reasoning was, in her words, if your feelings for me has any reality, any honest basis, what I look like won't matter. Suppose I'm beautiful, she said. I'd always be haunted by the feeling that you had taken a chance on just that, and that kind of love would disgust me. Suppose I'm plain, and you must admit, she said, that this is more likely, then I'd always fear that you were only going on writing to me because you were lonely and had no one else. No, don't ask for my picture. When you come to New York, you shall see me, and then you shall make your decision. Remember, both of us are free to stop or to go on, after which we get to choose. Right then, as he's thinking that, a woman comes near him and towards him and is about to go past him, and he notices her slim figure and her blonde hair laid back in curls. Her eyes are blue as flowers, he thinks. Her lips and chin had a firmness, a gentle firmness, and in her pale green suit, she was as if springtime had come to life, he thought. He starts toward her, completely forgetting to check out if she's got a red rose or not, and he notices in the moment there is no such flower on her, but a provocative smile curving her lips as she says, "Going my way, soldier." Uncontrollably, he makes one step closer to her, but then notices the woman behind her. It's Miss Hollis Maynell. She was standing almost directly behind this young lady, and she wasn't 30, clearly past 40, her gray hair tucked under a worn hat. She is more than plump, her thick ankles tucked into her low-heeled shoes. He knew it was her because she wore on her lapel the red rose in the rumpled brown lapel of her coat. The beautiful girl was walking away, and for Blandford, he felt almost split in two. So keen was his desire to follow the girl, yet his deep longing for this woman whose spirit had inspired her, he really wants to know, so there he stands. He looks at Miss Maynell again, and this time he sees that her pale, plump face is gentle and sensible. Her gray eyes had a warm, kindly twinkle. And so the lieutenant does not hesitate. His fingers grip the book which would identify him, and he understood now that this would not be the love he imagined, but would be something precious, something perhaps even rarer than love, a friendship for which he had been and must ever be grateful. So he squares his shoulders, saluted, held out the book, chokes back a little with disappointment as he says, "I'm Lieutenant John Blandford, and you're Miss Maynell. I'm so glad you could meet me. May I take you to dinner?" The woman's face broadened with a smile, and she said, "I don't know what this is about, son. That young lady in the green suit who just walked by, she begged me to wear this rose on my coat. And she said, if you asked me to go out with you, I should tell you that she's waiting for you in the big restaurant across the street. She said it was some kind of a test. I've got 2 boys with Uncle Sam myself, so I didn't mind to oblige you." Testing is appropriate. You may be surprised that God tells his people at times, "I've tested you to see what you would do." Not tempting to get them to do wrong, testing to see the outcome of the heart of his people and their will to do right. It's good to know what somebody's motives are and how they will perform once the decision is not easy to do. And for deacons, it's a must. So watch them. See what they would do. Watch if they've already served. Then if they've served, put them in a role as a deacon. Let me say this too. Men shouldn't be made deacons hoping they'll work out. Please don't do that. Make sure they're already working out. These should be men of character and integrity and quality, willing to serve and already serving someone somewhere in some way. If you've ever heard somebody in church say, "I think it'd be good to make him a deacon. It'd be good for him." That's not good or biblical. Don't do it. There should be a way that we've already seen men of character and quality who are already serving, and then put them in the role. And then we come to this, verse 11. In the same way, the women are to be worthy of respect, not malicious talkers, but tempered and trustworthy in everything. As you can see, it's not just about the man, but about his wife too. And let me be fair to the text, it just talks about women. So it may be talking about other women who may also be in somewhat deaconess roles. If you know Phoebe in Romans 16, as Paul describes her in that way, now, you can think about that on your own. In my years growing up in our churches, we've never called a woman a real deaconess as a title. But trust me, we've always had women who served well in those roles. Our churches would shut down if it weren't for the women who sometimes carry the load in ministry. So God bless our women. But for these purposes in this church, we're going to focus on this and think about the wife too, because she must be a worthy woman. Worthy of respect, not malicious in speech, temperate, self-controlled, even-keeled, balanced, reliable. You put what word you want in there. And why would a wife have anything to do with the elder or the deacon who serves? Well, if she is not reliable and honorable, respectable, and trustworthy, how can the people see him in that way? She must also be that kind of a person that would complement his kind of a person. If she doesn't watch how she lives and what she says and how she acts, then what he does can be undone by her. If she's not careful, she could be a liability for him, not an asset and blessing. In the eyes of the church, they're a team. If she loses respect, he loses respect. And it should be in the church as it is in their home, where they are a team in ministry. To expand on this, I would say if any woman in this church takes a role as servant or leader in some ministry, she should be this kind of a woman. Of course she should be. And now back to the deacon, verse 12. A deacon must be faithful to his wife and must manage his children and his household well. The husband of one wife, as the King James says it. In the NIV, faithful to his wife. This has been interpreted in years past as a statement against divorce. And I believe it is more a statement for marriage and talking about commitment in marriage today. Paul knew how to use the word for divorce. Read 1 Corinthians and you'll see it. He could have used that word in that language, but he doesn't. So it could be a statement against a bad divorce, but I think of it as a positive for a good marriage. So this is a man who's fully and completely devoted to his wife. His life is a testimony to the level of commitment in his marriage. A man who is faithful to his wife can be faithful in other areas as well. A man who can't be faithful to her, even if he's still married to her, should be questioned and criticized and will lack credibility in other commitments too. So these days when marriage is so often discredited and downplayed and deemed a joke, a man like this who dearly loves his wife and holds to her, is devoted to her, he will stand out, and he should stand out among the rest. I think this matters to God because he knows the commitment in this area bleeds into commitments in these areas too. So a man who is fully committed to his wife and she knows it and he knows it and the church knows it, he can be counted on as a deacon in the church. It also says he must manage his children and household well. Because if he doesn't, then what do you think of him? The way a man loves and treats his wife, the way a man loves and disciplines his kids, the way a man handles his finances at his job, his obligations, speaks loudly to folks at church, as it should. If a man has lost the respect of his wife or his children, then how can the church respect him? If his wife does not submit, does not respond, does not respect, there's a reason for that. If his children are wild or undisciplined or disobedient or rebellious, there's a reason for that. It says something to us. And beware of putting a man in like that. I think this clearly shows the wisdom of God. Why would anyone think of a man doing his job well if he can't do the job at home well? And it's the principle of little much. Jesus said, whoever can be trusted in little can also be trusted with much, Luke 16. Now, if these qualifications sound too lofty, like some can't meet those, I understand. By all means, let's not lower the biblical expectations. Let's just make sure that we also remember that grace is powerful and forgiveness is possible, and a man's past should not disqualify him for service or leadership. He's speaking of what a man is, not what he used to be like. All of us used to be something we're embarrassed about. But what is a man like? And I don't think it's even a list of perfections. I don't even like using it as an exhaustive checklist, as if this list matters and nothing else does. Would we feel good if a man is not humble, if he's an arrogant jerk, but he's fulfilled these characteristics? Don't put a man in who's arrogant. Let him be humble before the Lord. If you put a man in who can't show compassion, doesn't give generously, can't find himself praying, or he is a loudmouth, know-it-all, terrible representative for Jesus, is he still qualified because he met this list? Don't you think if we put a man in who's great in every way but doesn't love, like 1 Corinthians 13, that we might have missed something of importance? If a man can do everything but doesn't love, it's worthless. Read 1 Corinthians and you'll see it. Also, to look at it in another way, is it possible for someone to receive mercy because something happened back then that they're embarrassed about? I hope so, because I stand before you as one of those men. I believe in grace, and everyone needs grace to cover their sins and mistakes of their past. At the same time, these qualifications must matter to God because he had Paul write them down to Timothy. God knows what we need, and find what is best. Find men like this. In Acts 6, you'll find some men being gathered, being chosen, being given a task to serve. And we often think of this as like the first case of deacons in the church, but it doesn't use the word deacon. Did you know that? These men do an incredible job so that some women, some widows are not being neglected. They just need to eat. They need to make sure the food gets distributed. They're not called deacons, but maybe that's what they were. I'm okay seeing it. But do you see what Paul says about that? Sorry, what the scriptures say about them? How are these men described? Listen to this. They picked men who were known to be full of the Spirit and wisdom. Known to be full of the Spirit and wisdom. So you can say deacons just do small jobs. Those men in Acts 6, they just fed people, that's all. Yeah, it's a physical job to be done, but it's so much deeper. It carries spiritual demands. It requires a depth of wisdom. And it should be done by men who are obviously full of the Spirit. Find a man who follows the Lord well, who is full of the Spirit, has wisdom, and these kind of characteristics Paul writes about, and you'll find a man who can serve well. You may ask this, well, what kind of reward do you get from being a deacon if it's a thankless job and all you do is work hard? Well, listen to verse 13. Those who have served well gain an excellent standing and great assurance in their faith in Christ Jesus. 1967, the year I was born, Reader's Digest printed some of the best stories they received and printed it in a little publication. It's old now, like me, but it says the best stories from life in these United States. And there's this one story in there I thought was good. It's from James Hodgson from Salt Lake City, Utah. And here's what he wrote that's recorded in that little pamphlet. I was lounging in front of the TV watching a second-run Western when Dad came in from shoveling snow. He looked at me quizzically and said, "In 24 hours, you won't even remember what you're looking at now. How about doing something for the next 20 minutes that you'll remember 20 years from now and enjoy every time you think about it?" "What is it?" I asked. "Well, son, there's 8 inches of snow on old Mrs. Woodbury's walks. Why don't you see if you can shovel it and get back home without her knowing it?" "I did it in 15 minutes, he said. "She never knew who had done it, and Dad was right. I've enjoyed it every time I've thought about it." I don't know if anybody has noticed you serving yet or not. There have been people got here early this morning, and all through the week, serving in here and out there, and maybe nobody notices. Maybe. But the Lord knows, and He's the one who rewards. And people may never know the full extent of all that you do. But for anyone who serves in any way, as a deacon, an elder, a teacher, anything in any way, they may or may not get a pat on the back. You may or may not be recognized, but God gives in reward so much more than anything we can give. And I am grateful for those who serve as elder or deacon, for those who do any of the work here in our church. And we need more who do more. One more thing, we should honor those who do the work. So for our elders and our deacons from the past and currently, thank you. Give honor to whom honor is due. And right now there's a group of people down here taking care of the kids so you can hear me in relative silence. So God bless those who serve. And let's find more who serve well. We're going to sing one more song as we often do. And it's an invitation, and maybe this is an odd thing to do, an invitation at the end of a deacon sermon. But I'll ask you, do you need us to help you, to encourage you, to pray for you, to love you, to hug you, to teach you? Would you do like 3 of our young ladies have recently? Would you begin today a new life in Christ through faith and repentance and baptism, giving your life fully to Him? Well, we're going to sing this song, and whether you come forward or not, it's okay. But even where you stand as you sing, I hope our desire would be that we could be privileged just to be called a servant. And if this morning you have no formal role, no official title, but you could be called a servant, God bless you for that. It's the highest of honors. Why? Why is it an honor to just be called a servant? Because the Lord Himself became a servant. And if we could be just something like Him, we should be honored for that. So let's leave this place with this song and prayer on our hearts and lips, Lord, make me like you. Make me like you. Let's stand and sing.
Lord, make me a servant.